I think that the journey itself and the structure allows us to ensure that no matter what card you have, your experience will be the same. But the beauty of it is that the organization is ready, and one of the reasons why they brought me in was specifically because of that. So they hired a new CEO that primarily focused on to experiences. Getting this really massive organization that, it's one of the leaders in the space, around trying to solve for the affordability crisis that we have in healthcare in the United States today, right? So that these people are aligned in the same metrics and the same outcomes. So everybody at the end, their win is collaborative. I generally just really appreciate a challenge, and even, through my design career, I had this mojo where I never did something the same way.
Hi, my name is Jochem van Veer. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called TheyDo, the journey management platform for business decision-making. We raised over $50 million and are growing globally. Our enterprise customers include Ford, J&J, the Home Depot, and Pfizer. I mean, wherever you look, understanding customers is key to staying ahead. But in order to do this at scale, aligning so many different teams with the customer journey is incredibly hard, but it is possible. I really wish this podcast existed before we started our company, because so many companies are organizing around journeys and there's so much to learn. So in order to share what I'm learning, what I'm hearing with our community, I meet with industry experts. And in my video podcast, I'm here to explore the world of business strategy, design, and journeys, customer journeys, to really get an understanding of how leaders are changing their way in their business. So let's dive into the show. My guest today is Bruno Monteiro. He is the VP and Head of Digital Experience at HealthEquity, leading its transformation across web and mobile to help millions of Americans save, spend, and invest for health and wealth. Before HealthEquity, he was the Executive Director and Head of Service Design at JPMorgan Chase, where he pioneered the experience object strategy to personalize and scale customer journeys, which is obviously very interesting to me. And to you listening in your ears. He created the UNDesign, a system transformation methodology that helps organizations shift from ecosystems to ecosystems, in his words, by dismantling legacy constraints and unblocking flow. He also teaches at SVA's MFA Designs for Social Innovation, contributes to the Service Design Network, and writes on organizational design, systems thinking, and leadership. But what I like most is that he is today driving the entire organization to reorganize around journeys. And when we were chatting in the beginning, he also said, like, tongue-in-cheek, I implemented that at Chase as a Trojan horse. What more of an intro to give you, Bruno, and to welcome you to the show. I'm very glad that you are here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here as well. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, so a Trojan horse at Chase, and now you actually have the role to align the whole organization into journeys. And I think that's a fantastic place to start. And I'm going to draw some parallels with you, pick your brain. But I'm really curious, like, what are you getting yourself into?
I know, I've been asking myself that question every day. I generally just really appreciate a challenge, and even, through my design career, I had this mojo where I never did something the same way, right? That I always was trying to either apply a new method or do something new or try something slightly different. So, the idea of moving an entire organization to a journey-based model, it's fascinating to me because if you work in big corporate environments, you start, if you come from a perspective, from a service design perspective, from a systems orchestration perspective, you're constantly looking around efficiency, right? And it's number one thing that you start seeing is that, organizations today are not really designed to drive efficiency, right? And with that also, it's like they're not really designed to generate real outcomes for customers, right? So the way the structures are in place, their budgets, the way teams are set up, right? Resource allocation, all of that usually will fight against the idea of creating outcomes for customers, right? So the idea of aligning people across a journey, right, highlights that importance where we are creating value to a customer, and without customers, the business can't generate revenue. So you start finding those true balances. So getting myself, what am I getting myself into? So the challenge that I have now is just like getting this really massive organization that, it's one of the leaders in the space, uh, around trying to solve for the affordability crisis that we have in healthcare in the United States today, right? So and getting people to really on board and into health savings accounts, create new savings accounts, as well as you start investing and spending with those, because those are pre-tax dollars that you can use. So ultimately, when translate my experience from Chase and kind of seeing the transformation it created from us moving from a feature organization to like a journey based organization, it's the right approach for this organization, even though we require a lot of socialization, a lot of buy-in, a lot of getting people on board to what we want to transition to ultimately. But the beauty of it is that the organization is ready, and one of the reasons why they brought me in was specifically because of that. So they hired a new CEO that primarily focused on to experiences. So from the leadership down, at least I have the mandate to do it, which it's half of the way versus at Chase, which you mentioned about the Trojan horse. I didn't have the mandate to do it. I took a project and I mapped into what it would look like if we start kind of transitioning into managing the organization into a full-on jobs to be done, and yet with metrics that were really aligned to each specific job to be done, that allow the business to really measure and keep track of the health of these experiences, both from a KPI perspective, right? So the business folks really satisfied with their metrics, then from an NPS and a CSAT score, and then just really usability metrics that are really inform us whether or not customers are able to complete their jobs and they're getting like the emotional job and their functional jobs completed.
When we think about all these different like frameworks and methodologies, like they're almost like being used interchangeable, but it's also that comes at the risk, right? And I don't know if we should pack up the project that you did at Chase, the specific one that you implemented on journeys, or think about the whole transformation. I'll leave that up to you. But you mentioned jobs to be done. We have metrics, we have journeys, we have experiences. So the counterpoint would be like potato, right? I mean, we're all in the business of creating customers, keeping customers, and making customers happy. Like, I do not care, and I hear a CEO speak, if you focus on the experience, if you focus on the journey, if you focus on the job to be done. You tell me, Bruno, like, what should we focus on? So unpack that for me. Like, what do you have in mind? What is the difference between all these different like ways of thinking about the customer experience, ways of thinking about the customer journey? And when you say like organizing around journeys, like, are we organizing around jobs? Are we organizing around experiences or journeys? Like, what is in your mind happening when those things are like conflicting?
Yeah, so it's really important, like to I think the number one key to any sort of successful journey alignment or journey organization is really kind of creating a taxonomy that makes sense and resonates across the organization. And often, we will see, people just generally has this understanding now on what a jobs to be done is. But often is anchored on a verb, on an action verb. It's not a full-on job to be done sentence where you really get the structure of the functional aspect of the job and the emotional. So kind of building a little bit of, making sure that you're creating a taxonomy that's talking about what is a journey and what is a job to be done. I think each organization might have a different level of complexity, but kind of going through that exercise with the right people, right? It's really key in defining the taxonomy. I don't believe that like whatever taxonomy hierarchy we've created at Chase will look very different to what I'm doing today, slightly different just because of the heights, the levels, the scope, also the size of the project, right? At Chase, we kind of implemented journey management to a few orgs, and the card org being one, right? So it really depends on that scope, but I think it's really important to align into, whether you call, because they are interchangeable, right? A journey can be a job to be done, right? And a job to be done and a journey can be an experience. So, understanding the needs of your business and creating the common terminology so everybody's speaking the same language, I think is the big step, right? And I think people should be able to explore what that works for their organizations in the best way, as long as ultimately the goal is to align on some sort of outcome for a customer. Which gets us from the traditional aspect of creating a feature, right? Or of just focusing around a user story and on a feature based, which I think it's the elements. But yeah, I think just kind of creating the taxonomy, making sure that you have clear definitions, it's number one step. So everybody will be able to talk the same language for sure.
Yeah, it's funny that you said it. Maybe this financial services thing. I had Aki, who's leading service design at Lloyd's, on the stage at Beyond the Map last week, and she was also saying, like, hey, we switched from verbs to nouns for our journeys. So from vague descriptions, it's like get a mortgage, or understand where I spend. These kind of like simple ways to help people say, hey, we're rallying together to make that maybe journey or job, if you will, possible for the customers, how we show up to the role with the different teams, with the different metrics, with the different focus areas that we're having. But maybe like from your experience in the cards business at Chase, like where was it coming from? And then in the end, like what does it really mean to be like journey oriented for that organization?
I think what it means for the organization to be journey oriented, if you build a journey architecture that resonates with the business, it's really key to identify what are the core journeys that are operational, BAU, right? That gets customers in, that allows them to function within your product. I think that's number one. And the other part is the value proposition. Right? What are the journeys that drive value proposition? In the card space at Chase, we had a very different number of card portfolios, right? With different sets of value prop. So identifying, even though a journey might be similar, but from a value prop perspective, they might drive different outcomes. So, creating that alignment was really key, right? So I think the journey itself and the structure, the journey structure allows us to ensure that no matter what card you have, your experience will be the same. Even though the value prop of the card is different, right? So we have cards, or I used to say we have, they have cards that are travel focused, right? Which creates a value prop around travel for our customers. We also have other cards that kind of provides value prop around cashback and whatnot. So kind of, building the card org around those jobs to be done allows us to build the experiences in a way that are there's parity in web and mobile, and also it's consistent. So, no matter, customers often will have 1, 2, 3 cards. So they're always experiencing the same thing, no matter what, when they're servicing, for example, right? Or when they engage with any sort of entry point within the Chase ecosystem. So I think that's what the importance was for the organization, was like, how do we ensure that no matter how broad our portfolio is, our experiences are still consistent, and then separate from like, what are the things that are like, we shared across the business, like logging in, checking my balance, all those things, right? Servicing elements like replacing a card or locking in and locking a card in the moment that you might have some uncertainty that you can't find your card. Those are things that should be global and serve the core, and they might not drive the value prop of the business, right? But they allow you to engage and continue to use the product. And then those value prop journeys is really what you can measure, but from a business impact, as well as from a customer. Because if I'm promising you, right, to have the best experience on your travel by all of the benefits I'm providing as you being a member of this program, how do we measure that we actually living up to our promise? And I think that's where it was very interesting. It was be able to create an architecture that was global, but yet identify differentiated value propositions by card portfolio, which, made them.
Yeah, and in terms of like who owned the card portfolios, was there like one ultimate like executive that owned the end-to-end card business, where there like each different card had their own like general manager or person who like ran that part of the business? Like, and then I'm curious to see like how that then mapped onto like your journey architecture, because what I'm seeing is that in a lot of cases those business owners exist, and then we get into like, oh, it's better to organize or reorient around the journey. but then the theory, the frameworks, the data is in one place, and then the ways of working and the organization is in another. So how did that show up? Like, were there like 16 different business owners for each of the cars? Like, how did that ladder up to one person? Like, how did you do that?
Yeah, so yeah, that is generally the problem, and I can talk, maybe a little more generic, just from because there's a lot of business stuff that I'm not allowed to say. But I can tell you one thing: one journey in particular had about 178 OKRs, 12 different teams, right? Different budgets, different roadmaps. So one of the core things for us was to propose um, ownership, a journey owner, and decide who that journey owner is, right? And that journey owner should have agency to cut across all of those different groups, lines of business, and make decision under that journey. It's still, and going back to what I was telling you a little bit earlier about how organizations are set up for industrial era assumptions, right? Organizations are not necessarily organized to support things like that. So you may have a journey owner right now, and then you're looking, there's 10 different products or groups. Those groups have their own roadmaps, they have their own budgets and all of those things. So how do we transition those and break the politics within the company? A lot of leaders don't want to lose control, right? And so it was a little bit of a discussion, and I don't think that by the time I left, we got it all figured out.
Okay. So
It
now
functions
you're in a new
well.
organization.
Well, back to Chase, like it functions well in certain areas
Uh-huh.
where you have web, where you say you have card and retail banking, you can kind of split volume, right, on cost.
Hmm.
But now in this new organization, it's harder because we are just a primarily core business. And right now, I think we do have an opportunity. So one of the things that it's happening, which is very interesting, mobile product and web sits in the my team. So that already allows me the gives me like the little bit like a push already to say to a product owner, so you're gonna own this journey now end to end. So you're the journey owner, right? So I think it will be a little easier as I identify journey owners for the journey itself. I think the challenge will be more about at what level are they managing the journey against the
Yeah.
capacity that we have, right? Because I might not have enough product people to manage to be one-to-one to journeys. So, what does that look like from a translation perspective? I think to my current reality will be the key. But the fact that the product owners, there's some product within my team in design for changing the behavior and the behavior change mindset is going to be needed for us to be successful over time will come from the team itself. So
Yeah.
I think that will allow us to be successful much quicker than if I have to go evangelize across the organization and get buy-in and get people onboarded and the whole spiel you have to do to get things moving. So
What is the downside of just making your POs journey owners? Like, I know some organizations have done it successfully. I know others are failing miserably because it's like different title, same job. So what is making that possible so that a product owner, product manager actually thinks about the experience, actually thinks about beyond the features? How do you make that possible?
they have to be real owners. They have to have accountability and be able to be able to make changes and control. If you're calling somebody a journey owner, but you're giving them the same responsibilities as a project management, then they're just managing the workflows. And a journey owner should be able to make a decision and prioritize against the end-to-end journey. Needs to be able to make a decision that maybe prioritize the customer, but not so much the business, right? So it's really about that. I think that's what often will set off a journey owner to be successful is the level of accountability they have and the agency they have to change and make decisions within that journey.
Yeah.
And I think, we see a lot of organizations trying to move into a journey model, but leveraging journey owners as product managers. And I think there needs to be a little bit shift in mindset from them that they're not just tracking a checklist and a Kanban board or a Jira bunch of tickets. They're actually accountable to the end-to-end outcome. And, that's what should be their priorities and how their behaviors, right, will be the actions that they're creating within the journey management, whatever they decide to do should always be kind of laddering up to the end-to-end outcome for that journey. So I think accountability and agency for them to make change is key.
Do you believe that the journey outcome should always be about the customer? Can it also be about the business? Should it do
I think it
both?
needs to be a balance, right? And I think that's where what AI cannot do. We need to leverage customer intent and generate value for the business, and I think that requires alignment. Even within a journey, from a journey perspective, right? If I'm like going back to the journey that I mentioned that had about 174 OKRs, right? We were able to get within all of those teams, like there were 5 OKRs that aligned well, right? And there were simple things. It was just like short time to spend, which ultimately is an outcome for a customer, because if they spend long times without the ability to access their funds, it's a problem. So, things that really matter to the customer, but also matter for the business. Average handle time, the shorter the calls, the more cost savings we have. So, it's finding out those elements and creating that balance that you're not only generating value to the customer, but you're also creating value to the business, and finding that perfect spot. I think it's really key. Of course, there might be journeys where you may have to compromise on that a little bit, right? Because that's the reality of what we live in. That might be a journey that you still get a customer outcome, but the revenue is a little bigger, and you need it to survive, and you need it to get buy-in somewhere else, right? So I also believe in flexibility, to be able to do what you need done. So I think there, those elements, but a successful journey management program and a successful journey owner should be able to create that core alignment between generating the customer outcome and the business value as well.
Yeah. Do you believe that if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is almost like the journey teams are autonomous. They can make their own decisions. They can implement, they can create. But in that example here, you said like one journey was owned by so many different teams, by 12 teams, I believe, if I'm correctly. Like, how do we think about it? Is that journey not way too broad and too long? Should we cut it up into smaller, manageable journeys and make sure that there is a team for every single one of them? Or is that impossible in most organizations? Like, how should we think about the ratio?
I don't think it's impossible, but but you have to be careful there, because you're just replicating the siloed environment that you were trying to get away at first, right? So I think there are things. So within a journey, like the way I like to break journeys down, let's say if I look at a end-to-end car replacement experience, right? So within that core journey, there might be like 6, 7 steps, or there might not even be moments that matter per se, but let's say onboarding, like, or people are education, right? I lost my card. I go on Google to find out, right? So who are if you just map that into a vertical, like what are the teams that are involved into that? So it's important to start understanding that there might be this micro journeys that lives under this journey, but it ladders up, right? So from an orchestration perspective, what should come first, right? Based on the teams that you have. So that's one way to look at it. If you have a design team that has to address all those touch points, then you have to prioritize. Now, in the Chase example, where we do have assigned teams for each of those moments, right? From like the public site and all the information you see in public, there's a team that's responsible. So it's the journey owner's responsibility to orchestrate those people and make sure that, their roadmaps are aligned. Because that was the thing. It wasn't just the OKRs. When we look at their roadmaps side by side, nothing was orchestrated. So there were dependencies that would never be able to move forward, because things were ahead, and so it was important to even create a view for them to start seeing about. And you'd be surprised, teams also knowing who is on the other side of the journey, just to even go ask a question. So I think it's important to figure out, of course, how complex is a journey, and then kind of adapt to the team that you have the best way possible. But ultimately, through an orchestrator, and the end goal should be to align on a common outcome and create the visibility needed, so nobody's becoming a bottleneck for anybody. And ultimately, everyone, no matter what you are in the beginning of the journey or at the end, whether you are responsible for mobile or the call center that may have taken a call if the customer could not do it digitally, that these people are aligned in the same metrics or the same outcome. So everybody at the end, their win is collaborative. It's not just like a KPI for my function or, there. And I think that's kind of the challenge often. I think you touched on something very interesting when you think about journey management. So how large should a journey be, which is, I think it really relates to the complexity of your business and the amount of resources you have against it.
What about the orchestration, the coordination of the journey architecture itself? Because if we distribute ownership for everyone, every team, like journeys, then what could happen is that everyone goes on in their different directions. Of course, there's some collaboration, but the red tape, the politics, everything will be like as is. And therefore, the friction or the gaps that exist will just remain the same or grow bigger. As a result of that, some journeys will be fantastic, some customer outcomes will be amazing, and other parts will struggle. So then we think about it as like one journey architecture. All the journeys ladder up to like one big data model that is all interconnected. Who owns that? Like, how do you think about setting that up? And the reason I'm asking, like, I'm seeing different models, and I'm making up my mind on like what is the best for certain types of companies, certain types of industries. So how do we think about that? How do you think about that?
That is a very interesting question. I think there's something here is to how well is a journey documented starts there. I'm very picky around my teams and how they build blueprints. I want to make sure they're building a system, and then when we move a piece of it, that system collapse. I want to be able to understand what are the products, platforms, policies, or anything that's within that. So if you have journeys that are really well documented that way, things become much easier for that journey owner, right, to drive that alignment as the journey owner is orchestrating and sequencing the roadmaps to start thinking about how do you bring together the right architecture team, right, to build the right architecture to power that journey, or even to deconstruct that original journey because you have legacy systems that were there for 20 years and could be replaced with something new. So I think it's dependent on within how well documented is your stuff. So again, if you have really well documented, real tech systems and architecture that is true to what it is, it's a lot easier to orchestrate. Now, if you get blueprints that are just like action items, like on the background, the system should do X, then it becomes more challenging because you can't identify the people whose scope to manage that capability or that platform is. But ultimately, again, it goes back to the journey owner to make sure that they're creating the conditions for these teams to collaborate accordingly and create that visibility within the dependencies that exist across the tech stack or the architecture itself. And again, goes back to something that I say all the time is like, you got to make the invisible visible so we can make the right decisions. It was, we've been starting to, I push my teams as they're building service blueprints. I push them to build what we call service archaeology blueprints, where not only you building a map of the current state of the company, of that experience, but you also inputting the decisions that were built over time on the architecture, because you'll be surprised on the amount of legacy decisions built on code that actually stops us from making progress. So, I think that is where it becomes interesting. So the more visibility you have into the systems and the end-to-end experience from, all layers of it, the easier will be to create that orchestration, right? Of course, you got to have a strong product owner or a journey manager, because if you have somebody who doesn't know how to align teams, then you're also in trouble. So that needs to exist as well. Somebody who's really familiar into alignment and understanding the importance of alignment across his teams.
So this is like a full-time role in your mind. Like you have like the journey owner, maybe like the product owner that turns into journey owner. They still have like a piece of the journey because they have the product or they have the team that supports that. But then there's maybe a couple of those, and then on top of that, there's the journey owner that coordinates multiple roadmaps. So that's a full-time role in your book.
A journey owner should be a full-time role. I almost believe that a journey owner is the evolution of the product owner.
So no more product owners then.
Yeah, because a product owner is generally think, a product owner in the real sense of a product owner should own discovery. But you look across the industry, most of them there's very little product owners who are customer first.
Yeah.
That's the
No, they're
reality.
managing the backlog and they're contributing to
Exactly.
ideas. Even more so today with vibe coding, right? I mean, it's
Oh,
very easy to
they're
come up with solutions.
now they're starting, which is a problem I have, where they're making prototypes with Figma make, and then they're showing that to executives, and I'm like, well, the team didn't get approved. Did the experience team look into this? So I think
Yeah.
that's where I think it is a role. I think it's an evolution of the role because you're no longer just managing the function, right? I think when we started creating the role of a product owner, the web was very singular. It was one touch point that we had in the web, right? And then eventually with the iPads and applications and the iPhones, we started building applications and entire ecosystems. So I think with that mindset, the evolution of a product owner technically becomes the person who is managing the end-to-end journey because that now we have multiple touch points, multiple entry points, multiple entry points, digital different channels, right? Some digital, some analog. So how do you orchestrate and manage all of that? Ensuring that there's consistency and the intent behind the experience is to truth over time. So I think that's where there's a little bit of a shift over time where the role of product owner is really transitioning into more like a journey owner, and making sure they're responsible for balancing the business outcome, the customer outcome, and then how to ship this,
Do
which
you think
is
owner is a problematic word versus like
I think
it's
so.
creating a false sense of entitlement in some
Yeah.
ways? Like I like management better, right? Product management, journey managers, but I see a lot of organizations have product owners as a title and they're switching them up to journey owners. Like, do you think that that is a problem or just like nomenclature?
I think it's a big problem because ownership should be shared,
Uh,
right? So I think it's, when we think about it, and yes, we do use an interchangeably product owner, journey owner, whatever, but it's really a journey orchestrator versus,
mm,
versus a owner. I think the owner creates, touches on people's egos. I go back to the ecosystems, you have ecosystems in place, right, in a workplace. So when you start calling something a journey owner, the UX designer will feel, oh, wait a second, they own the experience now, and I do So
yeah.
you start creating these layers of questions around, people are really about ownership. And again, it goes back to the, industrial era assumptions of how you manage things. People had this assumption that in order to be able to manage something, you need to have control and ownership, right? So that linkage between control and ownership, it's kind of aligned. And I think it's really hard for people to lose that control and be able to trust in others to be able to generate something. And I think that mindset's key. So the journey, definitely the word ownership can be definitely really challenging because I do think it should be a shared ownership. Now, accountability is different, right? Who is accountable for what? It's a bit different than who's owns what, which I think it may be. It's I may agree with you on that. I think we need to shift anything that provides like sole ownership, right? Because ownership drives siloed, and then you're back where the forces that you're trying to fight from the beginning.
If you're enjoying this conversation, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave a review. It makes all the difference. The Experience Edge podcast is where I interview business leaders, CX pioneers, and the best designers who share their insight on creating business impact, having an edge on the customer experience. Do you want more exclusive content and behind the scenes access? Check out the Experience Edge podcast on YouTube and LinkedIn so you don't miss a thing. Now let's get back to the conversation. But what have you solved in terms of the accountability problem? Because what I'm seeing, service design, journey, CX, people coming into like this part of the role, then they struggle tremendously with like quantifying the business impact of their things. They're really good at defining customer outcomes and focus on the customer. They struggle with the business impact. You seem to have a holistic sense of the business. I mean, You even talked about sharing different costs, but and understanding like how do we actually show up together to make this experience possible. But that's on one side of the equation. On the other side of the equation, especially product owners, they know the digital world really well, but there's also the customer reality and the business reality. So how do you think about combining metrics, KPIs, so accountability? Like, how do you ladder that up so that we're not losing sight of what we actually are about, which is in JPMorgan Chase case is like your bank, your financial service provider, and in the case of where you are now, right, you're helping people to save in the context of their health. So how do we think about making sure that the business needs are met? How do we think about accountability from a business perspective?
I think that you need to understand what your business thrive on and what resonates with the leaders and the people that you actually have to report, right?
Yeah.
And you got to create a nice balance. You don't want to communicate. A CEO might have a really hard time understanding like a user outcome that are not quantitative, for example, right? So like, how do we build metrics, or you start thinking about who are you communicating to, and then leverage what you have to, based on what matters to that individual or that stakeholder. I generally think like as you move to a world of journey ownership or journey management world, I think being able to track down from a jobs to be done all of the metrics in one single dashboard starts providing all of the different visibility to everybody who needs to see something. So what we've done is that we've get the data teams, we get like, through our mapping process of our blueprints, we start questioning metrics, right? And then we start bringing the right people into that conversation as we're building the blueprints and the layers within. It's like, okay, what metrics should be here? What are the business outcomes that we want to see here? How can we quantify this? What we have today is that business measure things with very static metrics, and those metrics are not this should not be applied to everything. So each journey might have a different set of metrics that might be relevant to that specific journey as well as to that business outcome. So what I like to do, and that's what we've been instructing, the way we've been operating to get the buy-in, was that, so look at a one single journey. Now you build a dashboard, and that dashboard should have 3 layers, and that those layers will answer to the different needs of your stakeholders. So you have your CEO, your GMs, right, that are really concerned about revenue and things of that nature, right? So make sure that you have all those KPIs, but create a direct line of your KPI to your CSAT scores and your NPS, and then down to your UX metrics. So if you can even just click in the job to be done, imagine a world, you have a dashboard with 5 jobs to be done, and I click it, and I see all of a sudden it expands, and I have KPIs, CSAT metrics, NPS, and then UX metrics. You can respond to anything that's happening in a much quicker way. And everybody who is a stakeholder, because you've built this together, once you went to map the journeys and create your architecture, you also thought about what are the metrics that are relevant to the business, and you started building those dashboards based on that. So then you're already answering that question about getting your business stakeholders to really kind of see the value that you are creating within your experience. Another thing that we gotta be really strong about as we kind of building these dashboards and ways to observe our experiences in real time is tech observability, right? It's something that most tech companies do, but then how do we start aligning that to experiences? So there is a direct correlation between what the customer is doing in any channel to how the tech systems are operating in terms of performance, right? And this all in one, so now you're eliminating the silo, the reporting silos. Everybody has access to the information at any time, right? And the same information. So, but again, it's all about alignment. And earlier on, it's ensuring that you align into your journeys with all of the individual stakeholders that are relating to that journey, as well as the business, well, the payers, right? Ultimately, somebody's going to be funding this. So, and making sure that you're satisfying their needs and creating the balance, which is what most of design and product usually should spend time creating that perfect sweet spot.
You're making it sound very easy. Like you're glossing over the stuff. Like when we're mapping it out, like we do a discovery on the metrics. What should we measure? How to quantify this piece and that piece? And then who is actually owning these metrics? Who is responsible for them? Can we get them to like look at the same thing with us. And I think many teams are not doing that. They think about the customer, they think about the customer experience, the customer journey, and they got that piece right. And, lo and behold, they go into blueprinting, so they got the system side right. But then to what point? Like, if we improve this, like, how do we know if we're successful? Yeah, CSAT went up. Yeah, okay, well, and then what? So I think, like, you're making a very good point, which is almost like mapping out how decisions get made, right? How they ladder up to the people that ultimately benefit in the organization. So taking all of this, your learnings, and applying that to the new organization, right? Thinking about like redesigning the org and then like, where did you start differently this time?
So the one thing that I've been, I think the one thing that I need to do right now is mostly on behavior change within their ways of working for the organization, right? Because we wanted to transform while at the same time having a product that it's out there and it needs to be maintained over time. So creating the change to get where we need it for a target state, while kind of thinking through how to keep the lights on, pretty much has been one of the biggest challenges, because then I translate into capacity, where I'm trying to orchestrate a whole team on the journeys, but I don't have the full on capacity to have all journeys covered. So, and when these people are being put out to do things that are, keep the lights on, but they are parts of this journey, but I haven't necessarily been given the enough time to be able to orchestrate everything and then implement it, right? So what we're doing is that we're taking just a very few journeys and kind of starting to model internally to see how the systems behave right against that, and just listen in and see, what are the areas that will have to improve. And I think that's, I see the implementation of this and this approach that we're going to take here, almost very much about emergency, right? It's kind of like we create a system, and now we let the system behave in its natural environment, and then we remove what doesn't serve us and we keep what functions, right? And through that, we're probably going to learn who was the naysayers and who is the people that are going to help you get this out, right? Which is also the other part of the work that I have to do is as somebody joining a new organization, right? And trying to implement a new way of thinking that everybody's on board, because the minute you say, oh, we're creating clear value to the customer, everybody will say yes. But then once you start operationalizing and start questioning the ownership and all of these things, that challenges the whole idea that I usually talk about, the ecosystems, then is when you start getting the pushbacks. Then is when you start seeing like systems antibodies that are generally like fighting the system itself, start fighting the things that you're trying to implement. And so moving forward here, it's really going to be an interesting approach. But definitely, we're going to start with two journeys, two high volume, high friction journeys. So we can really demonstrate value across, while at the same time learning what works within the current state of this organization, which,
How do you pick those journeys? Like, how do you pick like where to start? You said like they're high friction, as if everyone knows the friction is there. Like, how do you pick them? Was it known?
Yes, so we've run a data exercise to really understand within the experiences that we have, which ones have the highest friction, high volume, and a really low NPS. So those are the
Okay.
things, because then I have quantifiable metrics that I can from the get-go improve, right? Through moving us into a journey in a more, journey environment, we have a goal of improving our NPS, let's say 20 points. So then I can track something against it. But usually that is the first approach we've taken, both at Chase and now that I'm taking as well, is looking at, those journeys and then just
But
do.
why MPS? Like, I'm always fascinated about that, right? MPS has a place in time. But if you improve MPS, like, you can't guarantee any business will move, right? You can say like probably, but it's not typically like seen as the most sexy thing
Yeah.
today, right? I mean, for a customer experience, it's the easiest thing to influence, but for the business, like, yeah. So
You see,
why MPS?
that's I'm not a big fan of NPS, and I'll tell you multiple reasons why. NPS is one of those metrics that's really hard for me to understand what the problem really is,
Yeah,
right? And how to fix it. So
exactly.
um, that is, a challenge, but it is a business metric that most business stakeholders value.
Yeah.
So, and unfortunately, business success is measured against NPS. Now, once you overlay NPS to other things, that's when it starts getting interesting. So this is again, why it's important to have layers of metrics and not just a singular one. But yeah, the NPS is just from a buy-in perspective. It's how business measure success. It's a very common metric, but again, it's a really hard metric to identify with certainty where customers are having problems in your experience and then how to improve it. Because, multiple reasons. It has long turnaround times to get the feedback, so long feedback loops. And it's the general, also the behavior. People are most likely to say something negative when they have a bad experience, when they have a
Right.
positive experience. So, even within ourselves, how many times do you say press one in the call you had for a survey when everything went right, but when something went bad, you're gonna want to say something. So, it's also a measure that's really challenging for that perspective. But it's a business metric, right? That organizations today see a lot of value, and so it's important that we satisfy the needs of those stakeholders if that's how they measure success and impact, even though we are trying to create a shift by infusing other more relevant metrics that gives more of a direct view on what success really should be.
And is then your assumption that by doing that exercise, by bringing the other layers of metrics in, both for the CEO and maybe downstream on the user experience itself, will create friction in the system so that when you are proposing changes, when you're seeing the opportunities and bringing that to the teams, they go like, no, Bruno, I'm sorry, we are not going to do that. Basically revealing the naysayers.
Pretty much. I mean, it's like, okay, great. You show me an NPS today, but you show me an NPS against completion rates and drop off or whatever, right? Great. It gives me a little more visibility. But then we just show me NPS. I'm like, oh, great. Do you have any other metrics that you can overlay here? So it starts creating a mental model for behavior change, right? So people start seeing it, and as leaders, it's our responsibility to anchor what's important. Of course, my job is to satisfy my stakeholder needs. So I'm going to provide the metrics that they consider success, right? That it is success, true, but it's not as tangible success for me to be able to act on making things better. But you start creating that. When I'm going to share outcomes, I'm going to talk about the NPS, but I guarantee you that I'm going to brush off on it and I'm going to jump onto something that's way more relevant that I believe that's what's going to impact that NPS. And unfortunately, I haven't seen any sort of way that or direct correlation between a change in experience and really a hike on NPS change. It's really,
Mm.
unless it's something really, really bad, it's really hard to, in a complex ecosystem, to measure what's driving that.
No, no, I'm with you there. I'm seeing more of like, hey, we know from the customer experience, like this is frustrating, or like this is what people are calling us for, and they shouldn't be calling us in the first place. Okay, let's unpack that, and then you dig deeper and like unravel the journey that was related to, which is in a completely different part of the business.
Hmm.
Find real opportunities, solve for them, see that people don't call you anymore, and then you call it a day and say, "Hey, we saved a couple of $1 million in calls that are not being made by improving the customer experience." Right? That's a better win than saying, "Look,
Right.
we moved the needle on NPS."
True. Yeah, this is why it becomes like, and also just if you break down NPS in itself, like what does it even mean to be a promoter, or like what does that really mean? It's like, oh, you recommend the business to somebody else, but then in a complex business, what do you recommend if I'm responding NPS from something that might be something so trivial as just checking my balance? So I'm going to recommend everybody to, I don't know, like I have a hard
Yeah.
time with NPS alone. It's not only, and to be honest, it's not only NPS, there's other metrics that bothers me. So having worked in healthcare for a long time, HCAPS is another one, which technically supposed to measure patient experience, but it's like a 3-4 months, feedback loop. And then by the time you get it, it's a survey that has like so many damn questions. It's not user friendly. Those are the other part too, which, we should be the better job as designers and
Yeah.
students to collecting feedback in a better ways. But so it's a very similar approach that I don't know. It's like, it's again, it benefits one side of the business, right? But it doesn't take accountability of the ecosystem,
No.
which
No, and it's
it's,
like it's the regulations that are like
well,
preventing us
that's,
from moving beyond these kind of like surveys that are not ideal. So the product manager, sorry, the product owner becoming a journey owner should focus her time on discovery
yeah.
and do more than just analyze the NPS survey responses that come in. So do you need to retrain them? Do you upskill them? Do you give them like access to all the calls that have been happening, the support tickets that are available? Like where do you help them to make the step to really like get the right discovery process done? Like do they get paired with customers? Do they go and meet them, like to really do like proper discovery? Like how do you shift that to really move away from NPS, get to clarity on where the friction actually occurs and why it's driving that?
Yeah, I think we are good at providing the capabilities, but we don't provide the motivation and the opportunities, right, for them to upskill and bring more of the customer understanding. So the capability alone won't support the change in behavior, right? So you have to create novel ways to engage them and the team, and use that as a way to even create alignment and bring architects and people who wouldn't necessarily be engaged, or sit through a customer interview for that matter, or a co-design session. So I think the level of insights that they can gain from that, even from an alignment perspective, by bringing the other partners that never necessarily gets involved in those sessions, right, and highlighting the importance of it, and then gathering their insights, which might be completely different than somebody who lives and breathes research, or think about the customer on a daily basis. So I think it's really important that it's not only to provide the capabilities, but then how do you build the opportunity so they can learn and change their behavior, and then you keep feeding them with motivations to do so,
What is
right?
the
Which,
what is the benefit of structuring your research back to journeys? Because like now AI tools are ubiquitous, and everyone can just like ask a simple question, and if the data is there, we'll get an answer. But what is the benefit of also like using the journey taxonomy to structure research back into like those jobs, or those
right.
experiences or journeys?
Yeah, I think, there's one thing that AI cannot do. It's surprising. I've done spend weeks, 2 months, 3 months in research to go on ChatGPT, and I'm like, okay, what's the strategy for that? And literally come out with the same damn things, which is terrifying. But one of the things that I think, that as you think about journeys and you start kind of breaking down into the taxonomy, and is structuring your research around the core outcomes. A journey might have different outcomes in different moments of that journey. And I always go back to card replacement one, because it was probably the best journey I've ever done, and it was a very strong learning moment experience for me. But you have the public side experience, right? So that's comms that needs to be generated correctly, and then you have, let's say, if you're replacing a card, you have a tracking. It might be a moment that you're tracking. Those are very different outcomes from a customer perspective, right? So you need to be able to align your research to those moments under the journey that really focus on that outcome versus the end-to-end journey, right? You might want to get to the overall as well, but in journeys that are more complex, you might want to have research aligned to those moments that matter, and then how those moments that matter really impact the customer in making a decision or taking an action, right? Or gaining the value they set out to look for at first. So I think that's kind of, one of the core ways, to align research. But again, the researcher has to have a micro view and a macro view at the same time. So you gotta, be able to zoom in and out at the same time to make sense of the things as a whole. But I think it's really important to start at the moments that matter part, to ensure that you're covering that element for that customer. And then, our journey might be composed of multiple moments that matter, and then figure it out within prioritization, what is the area that is actually causing the experience to be worse for the customer and prioritize against it, and then depending on how many resources you have to be able to fix it. But definitely it's key. I think research right now, I think a lot of people are, just because of ChatGPT and generative AI everywhere, I think people and corporations are start to shortening on research and designing on a lot of assumptions that doesn't necessarily get to the intent the customer have, right? Because I still think that to find that intent through research, you might find facts, but that
Yeah.
intent, and that insight that might change the way one perceives that intent, it still requires human agency, and I don't think AI can do that yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw the same. I think that this is an interesting point that you're making, right? The general insight, if you analyze all the data, it's like, let's take a bank example, is like, there's all these issues with delays of cards that get sent to people. I don't know, that might be familiar to you. That's an example I just got from another bank. And when you dig in, like, you can find all these reasons. But when you look at from a journey perspective, you could see like, hey, there are some of those moments that are like, yeah, it's annoying for the customer, but like we said, it's going to take 5 business days and you're on day 2. So we can't really, do something about it. Where another case is like, they sent the card to the wrong address. You're standing in the supermarket, you're ready to pay, and you're like, your card is blocked because it expired. You didn't know it, and it was sent to your old address because you moved homes. Because you call the bank, they incurred a big cost, you're frustrated. So that one you should fix right now, right? So, and I think that's the problem of the AI era. Is like, not every insight or friction point is created equal. Is that what you're trying to say as well?
Yeah, I think not they're not created equal, but I still think that there is an intent, like an emotional intent, that it's the AI cannot identify yet, right? That we as humans are able to, because we can resonate from a feelings perspective, right? AI won't be able to identify. Maybe it will a little bit from in an interview, like whether somebody was excited about something or negative about something, or the undertone of somebody's speech, or somebody might be uncomfortable saying something. Like I worked in a lot of for many years implementing healthcare in low resource setting, West Africa, and in Ghana specifically, and we would go from house to house, and the cultural norms would always come in where you would be talking to this household and they were hiding a female that actually it was just part of their culture. When a woman has their period, they put them away. And and then we were walking through household to household, and the community health workers were doing head counts first, how many people are in the household, and then do basic health assessments. We knew that there was something was off, right? So that level of understanding that you can get, because
Yeah.
of the emotional resonance that you have on what you are interacting, cannot be matched by AI. And I think that's where it becomes very interesting. I might be able to map a journey, identify the friction points or whatever the pain points in a journey, but it still will not get me to what was the original intent that the customer was trying to have when they encounter that friction point. Often that it's overlooked, and the AI will, might touch on it, but it might not be as accurate as we are able to detect, right? That we are
No.
able to kind of build insights
No, but
from.
it will give you the signal like, hey, this is the place to look at. Like, here's also some friction, but it's minor. And like, but here's a big one. Like, it's keep popping up, like in all these different channels, in the different surveys that we're having. Like, there is something here. Like, and then your team would go in and, be with the customer in their home, in their office, or get them on the phone, whatever it is, to really start to understand what's going on.
Yeah. One of the things that worries me a lot is synthetic users. And I've
Mm.
heard a lot of corporations talking about this, and I was like, don't.
Is that
It's
still a
like,
thing? Really?
yeah,
That's
it's
crazy.
terrifying because, it's like, okay, so we have enough research within the organization, so let's feed into a model and then now create synthetic users that I could just easily interact with through some
Mm.
sort of generative AI solution, and I can be like, okay, what customers feeling about X, Y, and Z, and then people, I worry about those things, because the information, and the other thing about AI is the information is only as good as what you provide, right?
Yeah.
So
But do you see a world where this could be a reality where you say like, look, we're only like using our own proprietary data. We've segmented, we've created personas. We actually have all the data to back up like these digital twins of, you know, our customer need-based profiles, whatever you have, and then we bring them to life through chat and say we give them to people as like a little voice on their shoulder. So they when they have that new magical idea and the voice goes like, don't like it. No, don't want it. Like that's the worry you have. Like should that be a reality?
it's terrifying when you start seeing that. I think if you look from a behavior change perspective, right? People are already there. More and more people are using less Google and are going directly into any sort of generative AI for answers. You're starting to see about OpenAI moving to a whole marketplace world where you'll be able to not only search for something but use agentic AI to make a full end-to-end purchase. So, I think that we might get there, but I still I'm still very worried and concerned about the level of bias that will go into some of the insights that you get for any sort of artificial intelligence. Bias from the researcher, bias from previous whatever was fed into the model. So yeah, I don't know. I have lots of concerns about that, but I've heard so many times about synthetic research personas that
Yeah,
it's fine.
it's sometimes the easy way out, right? And you if you know it's your data, maybe it's less scary. But if you don't know what data it is, and you get just sold a pack, and you can just like game the consumer outtakes on your new product, like that's where the risk starts to emerge, I think.
Right. And then, it's yeah, that's it's interesting. Even if you start you leveraging small language models, where you're building internally, and and again, there's vast use, right? In servicing, you can have specialists get content very quickly by leveraging, AI and voice and whatnot. So I think there is definitely opportunities on that you could leverage something like that, to provide insights on the customer in order to be able to help them. Even de-escalating calls. Like I used to sit through call listening, and I recommend anybody working within experiences to actually go hear those because it's like not only from a perspective of the customer but also from a perspective of the specialist itself, because I have a whole different level of respect for people in that role because they have a set of instructions generally, right, to provide service to people.
Yeah.
So I think this is where a lot of the AI usage that I've seen in the sense of like leveraging customer information and the sentiment and be able to provide it real time so we could act on has been really helpful. But from a general opportunity identification area, like to improve our product or better understand a job to be done or any sort of research level, I still feel iffy about it.
Yeah, but on the flip side of this is like figuring out a journey used to be like a lot of work. You needed to do the digging, you send out the surveys, you did the interviews, you collected all the data. Like it's a lot of work, and now we are able to say, look, I have an basic understanding of my journey. Now let's unleash it on all the other data that I have to really understand like where the clear signals are. Is that something that you are helping your teams to do as well? Or is that something that is not standard practice in the way you're thinking about it?
It's I think it's an interesting. I'm not against people doing that, to be honest. And I think it gets us to a quick assumption way very quickly. It allows us to build a point of view very quickly. But I still think that point of view has to go and be validated. So I think it definitely
Sure.
improves the efficiency and the speed in which we operate because we're able to gather, assumptions. I don't even want to go say insights, but I think that you then have to go validate. So you
Oh yeah,
know,
100%. No, I'm with you there. But what I'm seeing is like we're getting the best, smartest people on like the grunt work. But what you actually want is them to then go and talk to your customers and then be with them and listen to the calls if they can't meet them in person to really like build that empathy so we can actually like
yeah,
move the needle for the business by better understand. But right now, most of our teams are like they have their hands tied because They have to report out. They have to analyze. That survey needs to go out. We need to map out that new journey. It's like we don't even have time to do all of this. So there is a,
Yeah,
yeah,
you
it's a double-edged sword.
but you touch on something I think which is really key here, right? It's about building empathy, and I think that's what we're forgetting. And I think that when we compromise that the empathy building to information that is so hard that even though it's relating to a customer, but I'm seeing through metrics or through VOCs or through like an insight, right? Versus actually hearing that person saying something that's so it just builds a different level of understanding, and ultimately real empathy will come from that, right? Not from a quote that somebody said it. It's seeing those interviews. So I still push the people to kind of like get our high level stakeholders that are not necessarily used to hear customers, to do that. So one things that we do at Chase, very interesting, and I'm it was my I had the best boss at Chase. Her name is Martha Cotton. You all probably know her very well. She used to be the global leader of research for Fjord. And Martha always pushed us to bring customers. We have this senior leadership conference every year that brings around 300 of our top senior leaders. And for the last 2 years, I was able to be in the conference, but also support the activity, which is exciting. So, for the last 2 years, Martha kind of like decided to bring customers in, and what we do is that we pair, cross-functional leaders, product design, tech, data, in tables, and then we'll bring customers in, and every year we run a different activity, right? So last year we've done something interesting where we did a lot of interviews with those customers, brought them in. So it was 37 customers, each table had one, and then we built posters, right? We already had kind of some of the motivations, the mental models, how they make financial decisions, and those are all inputs. So those leaders had items to talk to these people, and then we provided canvas to allow for easy synthesis of this leader. This year we did something very similar, but from a different approach, where we kind of Martha suggested us to build some circles on a sheet, and literally we gave these leaders cotton balls where they sat with customers, primarily starter customers, because we were really looking around this 18 to 24 segment within Chase for the specifically activity. And we brought about a lot of people of that age group. We were in Nashville, actually. And it was very interesting because, all these leaders would never get an opportunity to speak to a customer, right? And yes, it was a novel. We weren't necessarily even trying to build real research out of here. We just wanted to create empathy. And literally having these discussions with people around, okay, where do you put this cotton balls? You have this number of cotton balls. What do you allocate to your personal savings versus rent versus going out, right? And seeing how people actually make saving decisions, right? So that was really interesting. And then afterwards, all of those leaders that are just generally on a spreadsheet or in meetings all day, they come out, oh my God, I didn't know that they thought this way. So it creates a different level of empathy and engagement, right? That I think that when you started just like, okay, getting data or getting research summaries or whatever way you output research, whether you use artificial intelligence or not, it still misses. So that face-to-face real person, I still think it's important. And I think that's something that any leader should experience, from a customer perspective, to see what they actually experience on the ground, that they're just not a number in their P&L.
Amen, my friend. Amen. I definitely concur with that statement. And we went completely off script, but I totally didn't mind. I mean, this was fantastic to really like pick your brain on this and hear you speak about like scaling up a journey-centric organization. So let me end with this question. Like, I know you created UNDesign. You deeply care about like making this work for organizations. So for people listening, thinking like, I am on this path, I am actually like building this journey-centric organization, like what will be the one thing that we haven't talked about today that they should know when they're on this endeavor? Like what have you learned along the way that you want to know, you want to share with people who are on this path as well?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. Like one is like question what you're doing in every way possible. Like is those don't just optimize things, question that optimization. Are you optimizing your legacy system and actually creating more problems down the line than you are? So that's number one. And the second one, which I think it's really the challenge that we didn't talk about, journey management, is that how then you create a single source of truth, right? It's really hard to, like, Confluence doesn't provide us the capability needed to be able to have the place to go into looking into those journeys. You can build it in Figma, but not everybody in the organization might have access to the Figma. So then how you structure the journeys in a way that people can consume? And I think that becomes the challenge, and we didn't really talk about that, because that's the thing that I'm still, keep myself up. I have all of the knowledge and the experience to implement the program, but then creating the single source of truth. Yes, I can create dashboards, whether it's, we're using Qualtrics, whether we're using Tableau, whatever, but then having that ideal world where I can see my journey and I can tap and I can zoom in, like all of those capabilities, I think it's something, that can really support, the success of a journey management program. And it's really key, and it's thinking about how you make this visible for the organization, not only for you operating within that space, which I think is key.
Yeah. So for people listening who know me a little bit well, they might be smiling because I know a little company that is trying to do that. And this is the whole point of
Yes,
the podcast. So this was not scripted. This was not
it was
created. So
not
thank
actually.
you. No, no, no. So I really appreciate you promoting like they do without saying it. So for people who want to do exactly what you just described, go to theydo.com. But for people who want to know more about you, Bruno, get connected if they want to know more or get more of your learnings if they can. Where can they find you?
Yeah, so I started the UNDesign Substack, which is Bruncar, BRUNCAR, .substack.com, I think. I can send you the link afterwards. But
Yes, we'll put it in the show notes.
there, which I started posting a lot of thoughts, feelings, thinkings. The UNDesign idea really came from, I felt like I did not want my job to define my career, right? I'm much more than that. Like I'm really passionate about what I do, and I have a lot of ideas and thoughts around it. So I wanted to decouple and not allow my identity to be modeled against the job, right? And some sort of a lot of the things that I believe, a lot of the things that I see, from a systems thinking perspective, things that I experience, trying to work in large corporations with legacy systems, how do we break that to allow for innovation to happen? We're talking about a world about AI and personalization, but you know how many times I've seen companies who look so nice from the outside, but when you lift the hood, it's like hard-coded personalization. It's not dynamic. We're talking about AI. Most companies will have a really hard time leveraging customer data for AI because their data lakes are a mess. So all of those things is really important to think about, and those are the things that have been in my mind, and being able to have an outlet to share that without having the constraint of calling out a corporation or a company, but really making that meaningful and truth to my practice as a designer, not an employee. That was really important. So the UNDesign came about that, and I'm trying to build into a more formal methodology, but it's really a mindset, to be honest, right? It's a mindset that I started applying, the idea of deconstruction before rebuilding. I started applying for my own career, and that's where I, you know, encounter myself again working in healthcare, and made a transition from full-on financial service to a mix of health and financial services, which is being interesting. So, that is kind of what the design is about. It's more of a framework slash mindset. There's a lot on the Substack. I'm building a toolkit. We'll be putting formal tools, and a more formal workshop that I've been experimenting with, in different capacities. So that's going to come on our website, which is undesign.org. It's un-design.org. So there will be tools there, but that's about it.
This is awesome. So we're going to put all those links you mentioned in the show notes, and people can check it out. And Bruno, you were fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing so passionately today.
Thank you for having me. This is something I've been thinking very actively lately. So it was the right timing as well, because everything is so fresh in my mind. And it's like from one example to try to apply to another world. It's just been definitely still a learning experience. And there will be more to more to be discussed as I learn more, and definitely we'll publish on the UNDesign Substack.
I love it. And perhaps we can go for round 2 at any point in time when you have more results and learnings.
Totally. Once we're implementing on this company, we'll talk a year from now.
Let's do it. I'll hold you accountable for that one. All right, Bruno. Thank you so much. All right, and that's it. Thank you so much for listening. If you found it valuable today, don't forget to subscribe to the Experience Edge on your favorite podcast channel, leave a review, and share it with your team. I'd be delighted. Today's episode was brought to you by TheyDo, an AI journey management solution for enterprise. To have an edge on your business strategy and to know why your customers do what they do, visit theydo.com and explore more resources to accelerate your customer experience game. And remember, the journey to creating customer-centric impact never ends. And here's always a new edge to discover in doing things differently. Next week, new episode. Until then, pushing the edge, stay inspired. See you in the next episode.